We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio. This is the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix and you are you, and hopefully you're here whether listening live on the stream or in the podcast. You know, I have been really heartened by how many people are listening to this show. And I don't know if the numbers on Blog Talk or Yahoo reflect that. I don't think they do sometimes. But I keep getting people that say, I love your show, love what you're doing. I was listening to you on Gaiam or watching you on Gaiam, and now I'm listening to your radio show. And so this continues to be a growing and evolving experience for me. It's certainly on the number side and also in terms of the content and the work. And today I'll be bringing you a chat with my pal, Richard Grossinger, who's probably one of the most prolific people in terms of writing that I've ever run across. And you'll hear in this story that he did a book called The Night Sky back in 1988, where he tried to look at all these various kinds of stories about the sky and cosmologies around the sky, from astrophysics to astronomy to indigenous models to even astrology. And the book was completely panned at the time by the mainstream press. And he started to do a brief cover scan for the book. The book itself was 400 pages, and he decided to do a few rewrites. 400 pages later, it's turned into an 800-page volume, and that's Richard's style. He goes big when he writes, and he tackles very diverse subjects, and his current interests are the paranormal, life after death, the changing folklore mythology of the American landscape, and quantum entanglement. So I talked to him earlier this morning, so I've got this recorded, and I'm going to fire it up in a few minutes. We'll get to listen to Richard. He's actually here in Austin, traveling from Berkeley to Maine, his new residence, and just getting his insights into his journey thus far. So we'll be doing that for the first hour, and in the second hour, I'm going to get into the immigration piece a little bit. It's, of course, my view will be the unpopular view for many Americans. If you are an American that believes that we need to house, feed, and clothe 50,000 new people, while there are people on Native American reservations on this country who are living in poverty. And I'm just talking about the Native American people, the people that are associated with this land, in their indigenous roots and evolutionary past. They don't get any press. They don't get, it's going to come to, I think, about, based on what Obama wants for 50,000 of the quote-unquote immigrants, based on the $3.2 billion he's asking for. $3.2 billion comes to about $75,000 per kid. Could you imagine what 75,000? Well, take that money and go put it on the reservations. How much is that going to be? We're talking 50,000. We're talking maybe 25,000. That's $150,000 per person on the reservation, or on a reservation. Let's just use that $50,000 number. It's still $75,000 per person. That $75,000 could go a long ways towards improving some lives, or at least incentivizing them to have better lives. You could take that $3.4 billion and you could put it into an incentivized program for small businesses and Main Street in America. It could go a long way. Unemployment rate is 20%, not 6%. That's what the government says. It's 20%. And then there's the people that don't file for unemployment, that are either underemployed or trying to make ends meet in their own way. But in a normal economy, they would have a quote-unquote straight job and be taking in a salary and putting away money for the future and a pension and all that. But that's not reported. So we got 20% of our population. I'm thinking probably more like 23% out of work. And the economy is changing. It's shifting. Manufacturing is going away. And we are on the precipice of a brave new world when it comes to being able to take care of ourselves and our children for the future, and our children's children, and vice versa. We'll get into that in the second hour, because there's a social engineering aspect around it that I think is really worth exploring. And so we'll tackle the big issue of the day, immigration. But now let me find this interview that I did with Richard. Let me just give you a little bit of background on Richard. He started North Atlantic Books, which is one of the top 3 publishing houses in the United States when it comes to new age or alternative thought material. And he has published a number of really interesting and eclectic and excellent writers. And in fact, he even published a book by Vladimir Putin on judo, because North Atlantic Books had a whole martial arts side to it. So he's published Putin's book on judo, and he's also published people like Richard Hoagland. He published Richard Hoagland's Mysteries of Mars, his first book, or Monuments of Mars, the first book. It has a working relationship with Richard. He's published David Allen Wolfe. He's published David Wilcock, Gabrielle Cousins, you name it. If they have had an impact in modern, critical, alternative, and esoteric thought, they have probably had at least 1 to 2 books published on North Atlantic. Richard himself has published quite a few books as well, and everything from The Night Sky to Waking Bardo to New Moon to Out of Babylon, and most of them tend to be enormous in terms of their scope and their volume. And I can see why. When he came over here the other day, we hung out, but he spent the majority of his time writing in my living room. And I'm thinking, this is how he gets it done. This is how he gets it done. He just writes. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where he is. He's made this decision to write. And so there he was on my living room floor, banging out about 2,000 words for his travel blog. Anyway, let's get into this. This is from earlier today, and this is me and Richard just checking in and riffing and getting his insights from being on the road in the American landscape. It's 50 minutes, so we're going to play this. We're going to come back out, play a little music, and we're going to tackle the big issue of the day. It's immigration. You're listening to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. Here's me, Richard Grossinger. I am now joined by my good friend, writer, author, publisher, thinker, father, and human, Richard Grossinger. Richard, thanks for coming on the show today. It's always great to have you on and connect with you and find out what's happening in your world and get a sense of your observations as to how life is passing through you at this point in time or any given point in time. So thanks and welcome to the show, Richard.
Yeah, thanks. It's been good to connect. I told you that there was that rooster. Is he disturbing?
No, it's okay. It gives the interview a little local flavor.
Yeah. Well, we hadn't seen each other in person for a couple of years since you moved from Berkeley to Austin. But we're able to get together here in Austin this week.
Yep, we sure have. And for people who don't know, Richard is actually moving from Berkeley to Portland, Maine, which is a pretty big move. How long were you in Berkeley for, Richard?
A long time. I usually say 37 years, but it's probably longer because we're probably closer to 39 years because we spent most of 75 and 76 in Berkeley too. And we'd moved to, but we finally kind of got out of Vermont for good in 77. And it's not that we'll never go back to Berkeley, it's just that we got rid of our base there. And shifted it to the East Coast. But we've been in the process of doing that since 2000, when we got ourselves a second house, a cheap house in eastern Maine, and started spending anywhere from a quarter to a little more than half the year in Maine. And now we're just going to kind of make that shift more complete.
Mm-hmm.
So we're driving it. There always is a practical and an esoteric reason. The practical reason is that we want to bring a car east, and so you're going to have to either pay to get it there or drive it there. And we think we have the stamina to drive it there. So far we do. We're about halfway. And the more esoteric reason is after being in Berkeley that long, it would seem to be completely without a process of integration or internalization to just get on a plane and arrive in Maine later the same day. It seems more necessary to unwind the Berkeley years. And since we walked the labyrinth of Patagonia, Arizona, I have the sense of this as a walking of the greater U.S. labyrinth out of Berkeley into Maine. And so if we take the labyrinth slowly, and we're taking 5 weeks with it, it's not a direct route. It's Berkeley, L.A., Scottsdale, Arizona, Patagonia, Arizona, El Paso, Austin, where we are now, and from here it's Houston, Avant, Oklahoma, Indianapolis, Ann Arbor, Toronto, Montreal, and then into Maine through Quebec. So from east to west and north to south, we're taking probably about 4,500 miles as compared to 3,300 if we drove it straight. But if we drove it straight, we'd probably have only taken a week to do it, whereas we're taking 5 weeks. So it's probably less rather than more.
Travel is such an amazing experience, and has all these psychic metaphors kind of richly woven into the potential.
2 miles in one day from El Paso to the outskirts of Austin was a very long day on the highway.
Yeah,
complete with spectacular accident just outside El Paso. SUV burst into flames just ahead of us, and they decided to let it burn to the ground before letting any traffic pass it. And that took, I don't know, an hour or so. I'm assuming the people got out, but I don't know that.
Yeah. Well, when you get out on the road, the security blanket that is wrapped around us in our day-to-day domestic lives can be gently or forcibly removed at any given point along the way. Now, the road is an interesting experience. Henry Miller once said, when we travel, we don't necessarily arrive at new destinations, but new ways of seeing. And I always love that quote. And what are some of the things that you've seen along the way early in your journey here?
Well, Robert has the benefit of having read I wasn't actually going to do a blog because I've done it too much, and I think that clutters the experience with writing the experience. But enough interesting things that I began doing it anyway. So I think that the most interesting things have been had a few days at the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center in Patagonia, which is run by Gabriel Cousins, who was a buddy in college at Amherst College in Massachusetts, a year ahead of me, who I lost track of for about 30 years, and then rediscovered him as a healer, an MD healer, and became the publisher of. But he and I have never really had anything resembling our personal connection we had as teenagers in college. And we got to spend a few days there and walk the labyrinth at the Tree of Life, it's called, if I didn't say that. And also have Lindy's birthday there on July 4th, and kind of compare the attempt to create sacred space at the center, at the healing center, which is very much a spiritual fasting place, as well as like therapeutic environment, with the town itself on July 4th, where we went in to watch the parade, and the shift in vibration between the attempt to create a sacred and esoteric space at the center, and it isn't that far. It's like the center is not even really out of the town. It's wrapped around a part of the town with a garage in the middle of it that says, we fix anything on four wheels. That's right in the middle of the healing center, and has nothing, at least explicitly, to do with it. But I think that you see not so much the gap as the continuity. I mean, that's what that kind of a ritual integration does. You go into town and it doesn't look like this is another universe. It looks like, oh, here's that same esoteric vibration simply operating in a different way, because after all, what not trying to make a separation. I mean, everything is part of the sacred. This whole thing is a manifestation at the same level. So it's just interesting to see the July 4th parade manifestation in the context of the healing center manifestation, where eating these raw meals and talking to essentially pilgrims from all over, I guess, the world, but mostly the U.S. who had come there. And then we moved on about 330 miles to El Paso, where another old friend, almost as old as Gabriel, who I met the same year I met Lindy in '63, my partner, I met Gabriel the same year, and both of them probably just before the Kennedy assassination. And then we moved on and hung out for a few days in El Paso with Bobby Bird, who we met in '65. The first summer we lived together in Aspen, because Lindy's from Denver and her parents said she couldn't leave the state. And I managed to get myself out there. I'd never done anything like that before. I drove from New York to Colorado, and we lived in Aspen, and it was a writer's workshop there, and Bobby Bobby was a member of it. We were all college students. He was at the University of Arizona publishing a magazine called From a Window, and we were Amherst and Smith, and it just started IO. Mm-hmm. And he appeared in early issues of IO, and he was one of the first authors of North Atlantic Books. And then the only time we really saw him at any length since 65 was about 20 years later in Berkeley, when he and his then children, 3 children, came through and stayed with us on Blake Street in Berkeley, where we lived then, and did a poetry reading in our backyard. As far as synchronicities go, the poetry reading was attended, among other people, by Mark O'Brien, the guy in the Iron Lung, who was later played by John Hawkes in the movie. Mm-hmm. And John Hawkes was also the actor in our daughter's first movie, who played opposite our daughter Miranda and Me and You and Everyone We Know. Mm-hmm. So that's just one of those, that's probably all too elaborate to get on the first take. But anyway, Bobby read in our yard. They saw our very, very small publishing at that point. I think it was about 1/30th the size it is now,
right?
And probably about 1/5 the size it needed to be to support itself. But he liked it, and they went back to El Paso and started Cinco Puntos Press, publishing border writers and bilingual stuff. And they stayed in place there, and those kids grew up, and their daughter became part of the radical wing of the El Paso City Council, and and their son is now running the press, and Bobby has a lot of books, but I think none define him better than the title on the transmigration of souls in El Paso. Mm-hmm. And he was a great guide through El Paso. To see a city that's 85% Hispanic, especially at the time of the kind of inflamed rhetoric around undocumented workers, illegals, whatever they call them, I've always felt that that since the U.S. annexed a large part of Mexico on a pretext during the era of James Polk, who really was the George W. Bush of his day, or maybe, I guess the Bush of his day, and then there were plenty of Dick Cheneys around. This is all interestingly narrated in a book called The Wicked War by Amy Greenberg that came out a couple of years ago. The America looking for some excuse to start a war in order to annex all of Mexico. Mm-hmm. And the only reason that they stopped short was that the support from the southern states fell away at the last minute because they had not fully realized that Mexico was anti-slave rather than slaves. Mm-hmm. So suddenly they didn't want it. And when Zachary Taylor, who would become president later, made his own treaty, he and the ambassador made their own treaty with Mexico City, then by the time that, with communications, then by the time it got back to Washington, it was pretty much a fait accompli, and Polk couldn't override it. That's an oversimplification, but the general politics are accurate. So I always felt, well, in some way the border moved that it remained Mexico, and El Paso is very much proof of that. In fact, the United States has gerrymandered that border around the Rio Grande a number of times. So there are parts of El Paso that used to be Juarez. Mm-hmm. And then Bobby led us across the pedestrian bridge into Juarez, and we walked there for about an hour and a half. And that was another really interesting thing, just the shift in vibration from El Paso to Juarez. Very short distance physically, but boy, on the bridge itself, it was like a vision from Cocteau's movie Orpheus of the people wandering between worlds, the beggars on the bridge, selling pretty much anything they could sell. And
Right.
it was pretty odd assortment of stuff. It was really anything they could grab and haul onto the bridge to try and sell, where cars coming into the U.S. were, of course, backed up to the horizon virtually, whereas traffic was flowing freely into Mexico. It cost 50 cents to go into Mexico on the pedestrian bridge, 35 cents to come back. I thought that Juarez was kind of, as I had imagined it would be, that in the experience it's much more powerful. And I wrote a lot in the blog I was writing about how it kind of made one feel even more shameful than they might have felt otherwise, because it was just so real. And you felt that if the infrastructure of America collapsed to the degree that it's collapsed in Juarez, things would be really ugly. I mean, ugly in the ugliest imaginable sense, especially in the places where the anti-Hispanic people most live, in the Midwest and South. Whereas in Mexico, yeah, it wasn't pretty, and the amount of, like, mutilated bodies and amputees begging on the streets and just asleep on the sidewalk, and the crumbling buildings and crumbling sidewalk. And but it had a kind of, it had settled into a kind of, what do they call it? The word is eluding me, but like it settled into a perfect kind of feng shui disequilibrium. And I found if you closed your eyes, the sound of it was incredibly musical.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it was the mariachi music coming out of every place, but then there were creatures, and there was the sounds of Spanish, and then there were just random noises, lots of children. It was a bit scary. Not everybody thinks you can just walk into Juarez and walk out with impunity. I wasn't that sure myself. But Bobby was a good guide, and so that he'd been in there many times and led us around the edges and told stories running from Kerouac's days there to his own experiences in various bars and other spots and streets down which people he knew people who had been killed or had people killed in their yards. And then earlier that same day, Bobby is not just a poet and a border poet, but he's a certified Zen priest. And so the El Paso Sangha met for an hour plus on Sunday, as it does. So we got to sit through a Zen session in the made-over garage at his house, and it's always very special when you get a Zen sit in a place like El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
The people who come, how really precious it is to them, kind of like the water in a dry climate, and so it was very transforming sit. I've sat in Berkeley and not felt as though going back to your, I guess, Henry Miller quote, not covered as much ground or changed perspective as much as I did during the sit in El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
And a few other just stray things. What impressed me in Scottsdale was just how hot it was, and how people lived there. We stayed with an author of ours, Mark Ireland, who wrote the book Soul Shift and Messages from the Afterlife. The titles kind of speak for themselves. We went out to dinner. It was their 35th wedding anniversary, and it was kind of a week or two after our 48th, so we went out and celebrated together. I think if you live there, you know this, but I was impressed that when you walk down the street, these misters spray cold steam on you, because it's so hot. And then also we were missing a few items, because really we packed up our life, sent most of the stuff well, it's in storage now. It's going to move east in a van. We tried to cut down on our worldly belongings. We didn't do it as much as we thought. But, so a van of stuff is going to go to Portland when we get there. But we needed a few items, so we went to the Scottsdale Mall, which, like all of those indoor cities, you know, speaking of Austin, Richard Linklater liked mall rat cities. It was kind of interesting in itself, and you just kind of can wander through there, and it's like totally different from what's the outside. It's cool and luxurious, and when we're in Patagonia, people talked a lot about mostly Phoenix and Scottsdale, a little bit about Tucson, as essentially fighting the environment, like asphalt, concrete cities, holding more heat, and sort of actually increasing the negative there instead of somehow blending in with it and finding the human place among it. Mm-hmm. And I'm reminded that Lindy and I got invited somewhat flukily to a meeting of Silicon Valley sort of high-level people a couple of weeks before we left through a guy who actually collected early IOs in North Atlantic books. And in all the years there, we never had such a peek into that world. And one of the things I learned was about a new project to use the heat accumulated in the highway, the roads, the actual stone of the roads in Idaho to generate electrical energy. Mm-hmm. And you know, just free connecting from there. I mentioned to Robert earlier he should interview these authors of ours, Neil and Elizabeth Conlon, who are right here in Austin, who have a book called Cosmic Cradle with us about souls in between lives, either having left this life and communicating about it, or choosing their parents for the next life and communicating. But Neil's day job is working for Sierra Club, getting coal plants shut down. And I think that he said yesterday that he's participated in shutting down something like 150 coal plants. And he never thought it would be possible. But it's become easier than anyone thought because they're not very economical. They lose about 70% of the energy they generate, mm-hmm. and they're essentially just running a turbine to create electricity when you can do that through wind and solar much more efficiently.
What happens to those workers that lose their jobs?
I don't know. They disappear into the vast American bardo that is variously logged in statistics and not. I generally resist it becoming numbers, though of course it does, and think, well, for every person there's a story and a past.
Right.
So I don't know. Obviously, I don't know in individual cases what becomes of them, but probably nothing good in many cases.
Right.
But
so for every coal plant that's shut down, 3 or 4 meth labs pop up.
Yeah. Well. Okay.
I'm sorry. I just had a vision of desperate coal miners or coal plant employees trying to figure out what to do in a town that has nothing, and all of a sudden they discover plumbing products, right? So.
Yeah. Well, you have to think it's less harmful to the environment than a coal plant.
Well, maybe the environment itself, but not necessarily the human environment. I wanted to talk to you about El Paso. It's a fascinating place, and I loved your write-up about when you enter into El Paso. Do you have that handy by any chance?
No. I'm sitting outside. But, I posted it on my own website, richardgrossinger.com. I posted it under the title Driving the Labyrinth. And I also put it on Facebook. I still haven't figured out, well, you and I worked on this the other day. I haven't figured out how to put photographs on my website, but I put the photographs on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
But the writing is more significant than the photos, which are just iPhone snapshots.
Yeah.
But so people can look that up in either place. That narrative.
Yeah. The scale of El Paso is impressive. I mean, area-wise, it's an extremely large city, and population.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, it really strikes you because when you come down out of New Mexico, out of Las Cruces, you think, God, that looks like as big as San Francisco, as big as the Bay Area. And it's partly because there's really no difference between El Paso and Juarez geographically.
Yeah.
It's all there together.
Yeah. And as far as the economy and even the social economy in El Paso, it is a really fascinating and in some ways dangerous kind of brew because there's a lot of Mexican drug cartel money in El Paso.
Yeah. Right, the mayor and police chief of Juarez live in El Paso.
Yeah, there you go. And there's a tribe of Indians, Native Americans in El Paso, one of the more organized groups who have gone the casino route. And they have become a political force in El Paso, whereas about 15 years ago they were kind of a fringe element, a disconnected group, and now they have casinos, now they have money, and they're starting to wield some political muscle. So you have the kind of this recently abundant and enriched Native American faction, the Mexican drug cartel money, and then you've got, your contingent of kind of Texan ranchers and all kinds of, your buddy Bobby. El Paso is in some ways the new American city, I think, because it has all these strange convergences and at times even, questionable in terms of how the income is derived and where the next sort of, pulse or movement's going to come from. There's a documentary there waiting to happen, and I think it would be a great one.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a good gig for you, but maybe not. You're more like somebody who points these things out, and you don't have the resources really to go and generate something like that. But maybe you could find somebody who does.
If anybody out there has about $50,000 they want to invest in me doing a documentary on El Paso, send me an email.
Yeah, well, go talk to Richard Linklater locally. Maybe he knows someone who'd like to do it.
Have you met Richard? Have you spent time with him?
No, I love his work, every single piece of it, and it's a very varied work. It's a wonderful work, and closest I come personally is that our daughter is friends with him and has come out here and interacted with him. But as anybody will learn who hasn't yet, who has children about adult children, they keep their worlds and their parents' worlds separate. So no, we don't have any other connection. I'm sort of laughing to myself about that because one person our daughter is really friendly with is the novelist Rick Moody, and we introduced him to her because we met him through a mutual friend in Berkeley. So whenever she talks about it publicly, she says that he came to one of her performances, which is literally true. He did, because we mentioned her, but for some reason in this generation it's very taboo to have too much association with your parents, even if your worlds kind of overlap. Mm-hmm. And I remember Rick Moody saying to us, when most people tell you that you should meet their daughter, that they're interesting, that you want to run the other way, that yours was the exception.
Well, that's true. For people that don't know, Richard's daughter is Miranda July, and she's a creative, tour de force. I mean, she acts, she writes novels, she does movies. She's a kind of a well-known symbol in the independent film movement, especially among young women. So she's really quite something. Does she still amaze you, Richard?
Say that again?
Does she still amaze you?
Yeah, because mostly she's no longer our child. She's just another adult, and we happen to know her real well because she happens to be our child, so we get an inside look at her, and she always does kind of remarkable things. We didn't see her too much. We mainly saw our son-in-law, who's also a movie director, Mike Mills, and their child, Hopper, who's 2, when we were there, because Miranda's doing a project that I naively mentioned in my blog and got her quite angry because it's secret, so we will not mention it here until it's actually announced later this year. No one's supposed to know that she's doing it, but it involves shooting a short movie. So I will say no more about it here. But I will, since we're just really shooting the breeze, tell you my absolute favorite story about her, which is it's somewhere around, I think, senior year of high school, which would have been like 1991 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And we had sent her to a prep school in Oakland, which was, in retrospect, a kind of waste of money because neither of our kids actually got much out of going to it. But there was a guy doing date rape there, and she decided that was no longer acceptable, so she got printed up a whole bunch of posters or stuff about what he was doing and simply posted them all over the entire school, and including on his car. And it turned out that his parents were the biggest donors of the school, and that the new, I think it was, gymnasium was being named after them. And so this was not popular among the administration, and things blew up very quickly, and there was an auditorium called, and different people spoke. And she came home and was telling us this whole story, like this all happened in one day. And I guess it was impossible to know how to respond in a satisfactory way. So whatever we said, it wasn't right. She stomped out and said, "I'm going for a walk." And she came back about an hour and a half later, and she was crying, which we immediately associated with what had gone on that day. But actually what happened was she had walked down from our house on Woolsey then to College Avenue, and she had seen a pigeon hit by a car, and it was dying on the sidewalk next to a dog tied to a road sign of some sort, a street sign, and the dog was bothering it. So she said she sat by the pigeon until it had died, protecting it from the dog, and that she just told it not to worry, that wherever it went, it would always have itself. And that was just so profound, and I was not yet ready to expect that kind of stuff from her, and showed so much instantaneous compassion at a moment that swung as a pendulum so far from what she'd been doing all day that I remain impressed to this day by the range and capacity that she showed. And I think, in terms of inner growth and having real compassion instead of kind of self-serving. Some people sometimes have self-serving or situational compassion. She proved to me that hers was real, and through all the ups and downs with her since, I've seen that that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about her creative work, the entire body of her creative work, but it seems to me like she's a person that's able to really synthesize and infuse emotion and thought in a pretty pretty natural way. That's my sense with her. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so what did you think of my cats? How did you like my cats?
Oh, I like your cats, but they hold nothing over Bobby Bird's strange cat menagerie, or the one here where we're staying in Austin. Here, the primo cat and the older one is named Dante, and he goes between his home and something called the Cat Scratch House, I think, which is pretty cute, because he's gigantic to see him try and get in the Cat Scratch House. And then Bobby had, this was very El Paso in a way, Bobby had two cats, extra cats, who lived on his porch, kind of like ritual guards, because they belonged to the neighbors who were killed in a car crash a few years earlier. So they've been feeding them, but they don't let them in the house, so they just live on the porch. But your cats don't go out, and they're upstairs in a kind of apartment, and they're sort of, you told your own story, they're somewhat rescued, and they show the intelligence and psychic alertness of having been around the kind of weird activity, weird and kind of connected activity, quantum entangled activity that you're generating there. So, yeah, I liked your cats a lot. Wendy particularly liked them. I think you said she could take them to Maine or something.
Yeah. I was being very generous that day.
Yeah, well, I think that they're happy in Austin.
No, I think they are too. So you're going to hang out here for a few more days. You're going to see Dave Inslee tonight.
Yeah, we always wanted to come and hear the music in Austin. So we heard Slade Cleese last night, who blends Maine. He came from the Maine club scene and now is really a mainstay in Austin. And we've been watching him for about 12 years, but we've only seen him in Maine. This is the first time we saw him in Texas. And then we'll see Dave Inslee, who's more local, Texas, Arizona, and isn't as well known. Doesn't get out of state that much. And then we're going to move on to Houston, where, among other things, we're going to hang out with the two people at Rice who are really interesting, Jeffrey Kripal and Timothy Morton. For your audience, Timothy Morton's book, Hyperobject, is one of the great radical statements on a different way to look at the environmental crisis. It kind of blows every perspective out of the water, every other perspective, and makes space for it. And Jeffrey Kripal, I don't know if you know his work, but he's published a number of books that are essentially academic studies of the paranormal.
Yeah.
And he's dug pretty deeply into finding links across the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries into the 21st century of people trying to understand the universe and bring together scientific and paraphysical viewpoints. And in this present book I'm reading, he writes very, probably invests not quite 100 pages, but a chunk well over 50 in Frederick Myers, who's really was the original inquirer into psychic and parapsychological phenomena, and I believe he was like 19th century. And then Charles Fort, from the whole Fortean thing arose, and then Jacques Vallée, who I published, and on whom Jeff has a very different take than me, but not intellectually. I think we both agree that Jacques has an amazing thesis on the relationship of the metaphysical and UFOs and a bridge between parapsychology and astrophysics. But personally, he had a very good experience with him. Personally, I did not have a good experience with Jacques. I ran into what felt like his ambition is like professional ambition transcending human connection. And that always seems to me problematic. But he is brilliant, and his work is brilliant. Oh, and I should mention that some of my interest in this, both hyperobjects and UFOs, is that I've spent the last 2 years rewriting my 1980s book, The Night Sky, and it's coming out in late August as in a revised edition under the title Soul and Cosmos. And this is a book I wrote originally for Sierra Club in 1979-80, and then I did some revisions for its Archer edition in 1988, and it went out of print in about 1990. So it's a long-standing project. And what it has to do with, what I was proposed for Sierra Club was to write a book about an ethnoastronomy book, a book about all the different heavens of the Earth, from indigenous cultures, from early Western astronomy, but also like Buddhist views of time and space, and the nature of language and affecting how we see the night sky, and pop culture, dreams, etc. And it was much too ambitious a project for how informed and initiated I was back then, like in my early 30s. And it's taken like 35 years to fully integrate the concept so that I could rewrite it and have an interior and exterior astronomy together, or shamanic and a scientific astronomy in one book. And I don't like exactly saying it in this way, but I don't think anything like this has been attempted. There are an awful lot of good books, especially in astrology, that attempt to grasp the cosmos. In fact, astrology is a big part of my book, and it is an attempt to grasp the cosmos as a whole, as a psychic and physical whole. But I don't think anybody has even come close to attempting to do it with astronomy per se. And you know, the original version that Sierra Club did got ridiculously panned. It was picked as the worst book of the year by the Seattle Weekly. People were really incensed that I would put astrophysics and astrology in the same book in 1980. And it was reviewed in the New York Times also by Timothy Ferris, who did that book Galaxies. And he panned it. And he accused me of trying to blend astronomy with astrology, which he said only showed how far apart they really were. When actually I'd done exactly the opposite. I had tried to locate each of them on a map relative to the other, without blending them, but to show their actual relationship. So, and then the reviews in the New Age media weren't really much better, because people just praised it without realizing what the, you know, kind of overall attempt was. It was just like, well, there's astrology in it, so it's good. But it turned out to be a mammoth undertaking. It started from just an attempt to correct an OCR scan, since it was pre-digital, of the Archer 1988 edition, and to correct and update it and get in things like dark matter and string theory and stuff. But once I got sucked into the vortex, like 19 months passed before I could get back out of it and get the book done, and it doubled its size from about 400 pages to 800 pages. So that's one of the reasons. I was interested in hyperobjects in relation to black holes and quantum theory as an application to cultural objects out of that.
Mm-hmm.
You can see Timothy Morton talking about that if you look him up on YouTube. And anyway, on Monday we're going to get together with all these people, and then we're going to move on to Oklahoma, where Lindy's closest friend from high school, from the end of high school, returned to her family land on the Omaha Osage Reservation, and we're going to visit her. Lindy hasn't seen her since 1962. So, and then we're finally going to wind out of the labyrinth up through, Oklahoma seems forever, either from where we've been or where we're going, but it borders on Missouri, which borders on Illinois, which borders on Indiana, and so forth.
Right.
A little bit like that Tim O'Brien novel, Going After Cacciato, where the deserters get out of Vietnam and work their way to Paris, country by country. This is a little less serious.
Well, the trip from Austin to Houston is about as different as the trip from El Paso to Austin, because you'll see where Texas bleeds into the South. You're going to find this fascinating, and you can see it agriculturally with rice fields and incredibly green, small kind of shrubby forests and trees, but quite green, not arid or dry. And the Colorado River kind of snakes through that journey as well. So you'll cross the Colorado River a couple times, and then you'll see these roadside churches, which you would assume or that they would be in the South. I mean, they're perfect, right? There's the church on the side of the road. It looks like a church on the side of the road in the South. You go, oh yeah, and then about half a mile down, you'll see a barbecue joint. I mean, you'll really get a flavor of this shift from cosmopolitan Austin to really going into the South. And then when you hit Houston, that's a whole nother world. And Texas has really interesting and strange cities, and Houston definitely qualifies as one of them.
Yeah, well, you're from the Bay Area originally, and I think that as the Bay Area has moved from, as they say, hippie to yuppie to techie, it's no longer as much an adventure or that interesting, and that's certainly a force in our wanting to get out. Plus that we've been there too long. So discovering Texas is like part of discovering the rest of America.
Yep.
And there just are a lot of, you yourself described coming to a dead end kind of in your soul in California, and circumstances led you to come to Austin. And there are these other places. Our best-selling author, Paul Pitcher, just up and moved from the Bay Area to Denver recently.
Mm-hmm.
And there, not that there aren't lots of good things and good people happening still in the Bay Area, but just saying that there also is this kind of sense of branching out and seeing what's happening in the rest of the country and finding these other things growing up.
Yeah.
So that California as the only place that's gone.
It's the transmigration of the California soul. That's what I think we're witnessing now, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and sharing some time and having your stories get told to people that may not necessarily be on your list or your blog, and you can find out more about Richard and his mammoth and voluminous works at richardgrossinger.com and keep up with him on his blog as well. So Thank you, Richard, and hopefully we'll see you tonight and catch a little bit of your buddy Dave Inslee.
Okay, good. Thanks, Robert.
Okay, take care. All right.
Bye.
So that was Richard Grossinger from earlier this morning talking about his travels and journeys from California through the labyrinth of the American Southwest, where he's now resting peacefully, I'm sure, in the cool shade of the east side of Austin, Texas. It's going to get real hot here this weekend. It's going to be up around 100 degrees. But apparently they're also expecting the polar vortex to have its return performance on the East Coast next week. So if you're living on the East Coast, get ready. It could get weird. It could get very, very weird. I was watching The Day After Tomorrow on TV the other night. And it was really interesting to see that film. Apparently, Art Bell had some hand in that movie with the story. And if you're not familiar with it, it is, I'm not sure if it is the film that's supposed to be about the horrors of global warming, because the world doesn't end in heat, it ends in ice, according to The Day After Tomorrow. There's massive cyclonic storms with temperatures of 100 below colliding all across the northern hemisphere. And Jake Gyllenhaal is in it. He plays the son. Dennis Quaid plays the dad, who is a researcher. And so there's a couple of different storylines going on. But one of the most fascinating storylines that takes place is the mass migration from the United States down to Mexico. And Mexico, their debt is zeroed out by the United States, so they allow their friends from the north to come in and migrate into Mexico, which is not frozen over like the great northern tundra. But it gives an interesting and ironic slant around this whole notion of borders and immigration. And we're going to talk about that in the next hour here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little bit of music. It's actually new music. It's not new, but music I haven't played before. And there's a group out of LA called Dengue Fever, and they put together a compilation of musicians from Cambodia, which is where the lead singer from Dengue Fever is from, Cambodia. And it's a pretty interesting collection of songs. It's kind of traditional meets slightly pop. So this is a track from that record, and this is Master Kong. That is his name, Master Kong. And the track is Kong Nai. So a little bit of exotica here for you on the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. We'll be back in 4 minutes and 4 seconds, and we will dive into the border. that brief little interlude of semi-exotic music coming from Cambodia via Master Kong. Kong is the name of the track. So we're going to get into this whole issue around what's happening south of the border. It is important. It is historic in many ways. And I wrote about it on my blog this past week, and I looked at it from Jupiter and Cancer, the Jupiter and Cancer perspective, because, of course, we know that Jupiter expands whatever it is in and does. And so what we're looking at with Jupiter and Cancer is the expansion of this whole notion of land and family and roots and everything that goes along with it. And it's happening on both sides of the border. It's happening on this side of the border because we have people in Murrieta, California, who are pretty angry and upset that these, and let's use the term illegals, they are here illegally. They are coming here illegally because there is a legal channel. If there was not a legal channel, then they wouldn't be illegal. We have to define the term based on the rules of engagement for the rest of the world. So if the rest of the world, let's say, for instance, you were from Norway and you wanted to come to this country, and you showed up at the border and pulled a similar stunt, and let's say that they had a coyote, which the coyotes are the people that get you from one side of the river to the other. Maybe they use a jet ski, maybe they use a little boat, whatever they are. They're traffickers. They're human traffickers. But let's say you were a Norwegian and you were coming across the border. First of all, you would not likely be taken to some form of assimilation center where you would be processed and you'd be told to go to have a court appearance in 3 months. This is what happens. It wouldn't happen to you because you would immediately be turned around and either sent to a holding facility here in the States, or you'd be sent back to Norway on a pretty Spartan flight, no Wi-Fi, and you probably have to pay for it. So let's just keep this in context. The person from Norway, or the person from England, or the person from Italy, or the person from France, they have to go through a whole different channel. I even saw this with refugees from Africa that had back in the 90s. I had a neighbor who was from Senegal, and he had to go the whole legal routes. He had to go the citizenship route. He had to find a sponsor and all these things. So there is a legal path, and when people are attempting to do something different based on the terminology and the definition of the language, the other is illegal, okay? So let's just frame it and contextualize it in that way. So this is a huge crisis, and we're seeing this through Jupiter and Gemini and the expansion of the whole notion and ideals of family, roots, this land is our land, kind of a vibration, right? This is where it's coming from over on this side, and we're reaching a tipping point here at the 28th, 29th, and 30th degree of Jupiter and Cancer. We're really reaching a tipping point because this event is it's like the top sort of piece on the Jenga stack that you just added, and you have to pull out at some point. This is where we're at right now. The thing is wobbling. Everything is wobbling, and people have had enough. You know, whether or not this is my perception, whether or not you believe in events like Sandy Hook, or whether or not you believe in events like the Boston Marathon, whether they're real or not, whether they're false flags, these events have a cumulative effect on our psyches. So if you view the Boston Marathon event from the eyes of that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and his brother were the ones that were perpetrating the whole thing, then you would at least see it and feel it and experience it as yet another level of stress on your life as an American. And so then you would see this event happening south of our border, just south of our border, and that would add to this accumulative mounting pressure that people are dealing with. If you're on the other side of the fence with something like the Boston Marathon, you say false flag all the way, and then you see what's happening south of the border, it still adds pressure because you know something else is going on there that isn't just this organic children's crusade coming up from the bowels of Central America, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. I want you to put yourself in the feet of those people. Put yourself in the feet of those people. They have had to travel from the center of Central America, and they've had to essentially cross through the entirety of Mexico. And these are not people well equipped to deal with that kind of travel and stop along the way and get food and get water and have shelter and take a shower and watch cable TV. These people barely have 2 cents to rub together. Okay? So how do they make the journey? How do they get from Central America all the way through Mexico, which is dangerous as hell, by the way? I mean, that is a rough path for anyone, let alone 50,000 people, mostly women with children. How do they do it? How do they get there? And how do they get there intact? Well, the answer to that question isn't the fact that they were in a angelic bubble, guided and guarded by God and the Virgin Mary herself. That's not how they got there. They got there because they got help. They got help getting from Central America to the border. If people have not figured that out yet, then you're missing the story. You know, all you're seeing is a sensationalization of children. And by the way, children if you want to pry somebody open, if you want to pry their psyche open, use children. Children are always that thing, right? Oh, it's the children. Children. You remember when Saddam Hussein, a long time ago, was accused of killing babies in an infirmary and a hospital. But that and gassing the Kurds, those are the things that inflamed people. He killed the children. Well, we found out later that the person who was sharing this horrific and shocking testimony was actually the daughter of one of Saddam Hussein's oppositions and a paid operative of the American government. So her children's story didn't hold up too well. But it's always the children, isn't it? Sandy Hook, it's the children. You know, Boston Marathon, it's the children in the Boston Marathon that got hurt. It's the children. That's how they crack it open. That's how they get us to feel a sense of pity, compassion, sadness, in some cases, shame, whatever it is. And so here we have children being used again as a psychological operation. Oh my God, these poor children. And yeah, they are poor children. They incarnated in a pretty difficult and challenging set of circumstances. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. And they have some very difficult steps to climb in life to achieve a life of fill in the blank, whatever that life is. Success, happiness, family, whatever. They just do not have the same kinds of resources available to them where they live, because where they live is kind of fucked up. Why is it fucked up? Because corporations basically own all of Central America through companies like United Fruit. It's a huge fruit, agricultural conglomerate. ConAgra owns a lot of Central America. The oil companies own a lot of Central America. So they don't even have a real stake in their own country because their own country doesn't belong to them. And that's one of the big issues here. So what else is going on in those countries besides the rampant pursuit of whatever resources are available there, extracted and sold in other parts of the world, this part of the world and others? There's also a lot of crime taking place in Central America. Back in the day when there were major death squads in places like El Salvador, where fathers were killed because they were standing up against these corporate criminals, and they had their own resistance, their own guerrilla fighters. There were whole groups of children that, and these were real kids, groups of children that were left fatherless, that were left with the void and the vacuum of cultural inheritance and legacy just blown away. Those kids, a lot of them grew up to become gang members of MS-13, starting in places like El Salvador and Honduras. And MS-13 to this day is one of the most vicious gangs on the face of the earth. And they are very much in the United States. MS-13 can be found in almost every major city now, and a lot of the minor ones, as far north as Wyoming. And this is not your garden variety gang. This is a gang that is into occult and satanic worship as their ideological and spiritual, darkly spiritual back end. That's what they do. You can see it. You can see the story on their faces and their tattoos. These MS-13, there are members of MS-13 that have been found in these quote-unquote refugee camps, 13, 14, 15-year-old members of MS-13. And these are not your average 13, 14, 15-year-olds. So what we're dealing with here isn't, again, just the poor and dispossessed women and children of El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. We're dealing with a complete criminal underclass, and I'm sorry. These are the facts. I got an email. I want to read this to you. This is from one of my readers. Her son just recently got a job with the BIA, it's the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and he is going to be kind of a boots-on-the-ground guy on the res up north. And so he has had contact with the people and on the borders. They get training there. So this is the email that she sent to me. She says, was wondering when you would address this issue in Texas, which I did this week. It's just another low-down, dirty act of the admin, and I'm sick and tired of it. By the way, my son goes to Artesia, New Mexico, in 1 week for 4 months of training alongside Border Patrol and, yes, the new facility for these illegal aliens who are already arriving there. Yes, illegal aliens, not immigrants. I know that a lot of the BP agents, those are Border Patrol, have already gotten sick from these kids. They are not being screened for health issues, nor gang affiliation, but yet are being sent all around our great country as they are. Can you say bio-warfare? My son has already had H1N1, MRSA, chickenpox. The one thing I worry about is the antibiotic-resistant TB. I just pray that he makes it through his training without incurring any health-related issues. She says, in capitals, I know they did not travel here on their own. There were our contractors helping them with the trip, hired, bought, and paid for by this administration. Her son has already encountered MS-13 in Wyoming. More are now on their way. What is Texas doing? Arizona. It's not easy being a Fed, especially where he is. No one trusts them. Anyway, that gives you a sense as to what's happening slightly from the inside. Okay, so we have our Border Patrol getting sick all the time from these diseases that are, or viruses and diseases that are being brought into the country without being checked at all. Well, of course, who's going to benefit from this? It's going to be the vaccine industry. That's who's going to benefit from it, because now if you have this wave of uninoculated or infected people coming into this country, Merck Pharmaceutical and Bayer and all those guys, they're just rubbing their hands together. Because what do we have here? We've got problem, reaction, solution, Hegelian dialectic. Hegelian dialectic placed with monkey virus and mercury. So, yeah, sure, let them in. Let's get a lot of people sick, and then let's start shooting people up and inoculating them. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? So this is just one aspect of this that isn't really being talked about. Jupiter in Cancer theoretically should expand and address these issues. And it's happening here in this country, already documented what's happening in Murrieta, but it's also happening on the other side of the border. Why? Because it's expanding their notion of what home is. And it's expanding their ability to get to a new place, right? Because I agree with Tamara. They've had help. Remember, okay, Barack Obama was what before he became president? He was a community organizer. He was trained in the School of Community Organization as taught by Saul Alinsky. So this is clearly a community organized based event. And it's crossing over and cross-pollinating with the whole Cloward-Piven strategy of flooding the welfare system. So this is what we're looking at here is, in my estimation, not some kind of organic, chest-pumping, signal-tripping, migratory response to an environment that is no longer habitable or hospitable. No, this has been a staged and managed event where people were told that certain things would be available to them once they crossed the border and got to the United States. It was clearly mapped out. And there are pictures that are floating around the internet of kids from El Salvador wearing Nikes with Barack Obama painted on the shoe with the words, "Yes, we can." So this has all the markings of an organized, strategized, and implemented event from the top down. This is what's happening. And most Americans just aren't aware of it. They're not aware of what's taking place. And I tell you what, if you bring this up and you talk about it in this way, then you're considered hateful or bigoted or ignorant, or just, add the phrase. We've gone down this path many, many times. So it's really difficult to have an open kind of dialogue around it. Does it suck for these kids? Sure, it sucks for the kids, of course. But they were incentivized to come here. Let's just be real about it. Now, while we're wrestling with our immigration problems, all the way across the planet, something big is happening in Israel. And all I can say is they're probably very thankful that we're spending most of our time talking about our borders, because right now what's happening in Israel, Palestine, Gaza, is getting really, really close to genocide. I mean, there is killing and bloodlust going on in that part of the world. And nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. And if they do talk about it, it's like, well, it's really complex. It's a complex story. It's been going on for thousands of years. They're never going to solve it. Throw your hands in the air. It's getting worse. I'll tell you how worse it's getting. Lebanon is firing rockets into Israel. That's right. There are radical Muslims now firing rockets into Israel from Lebanon. So Israel has incurred the wrath of people on the other side of their quote-unquote Iron Dome. The Iron Dome, of course, is their vaunted anti-missile defense system. I'm going to read this to you. This is from Al Jazeera. Rocket fire from Lebanon hits Israel. Unclear who was behind attack. Gaza rocket fire struck a gas station and set it ablaze Friday in southern Israel. seriously wounding one person as rocket fire also came from Lebanon for the first time in the 4-day offensive. They're at war, folks. There's a war going on in Israel right now. And this thing could really explode. Meanwhile, you've got the ISIS/ISIL people continuing to march towards Baghdad. And oh yeah, of course, drone strikes they're possible. This government would unleash drone strikes in Baghdad, right? So now we've got this whole thing going on with ISIS and Baghdad. We've got a war taking place in Gaza. We also have what's happening in the Ukraine with eastern Ukraine, which is a very strange thing because Putin's nowhere to be found. And the resistance is coming from the eastern Ukrainians, and it's bloody. So we've got these wars going on around the planet right now. We do not live in a time of peace. But what I'm trying to share with you about the border piece is that, this border thing has been going on with Israel and Gaza for decades, and it is a mess. And they've built a massive wall, but it's really become kind of an apartheid state on the other side of that wall. Nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. There's all kinds of, open hearts and compassion and Americans shouting at each other about what's happening south of the border, but nobody gives a shit about what happens to the Palestinians. And it's big, and it's getting bigger. The explosion in Ashdod sent plumes of smoke high into the air. Israeli health officials said the blast wounded 3 people, including 1 in serious condition. Rocket fire continued in earnest from Gaza towards various locations in southern Israel. In northern Israel, rocket fire struck near the Lebanese border, and the military responded with artillery fire toward the source in southern Lebanon. Military spokesman Colonel Peter Lerner said the Lebanese military said 3 rockets were fired toward Israel at 6 a.m., and the Israelis retaliated by firing about 25 artillery shells in the area. Lebanese troops and United Nations peacekeepers later began searching the area, and the military said it was trying to find out who was behind the attack. No one was wounded on either side. Southern Lebanon is a stronghold of the Shiite militant group Hezbollah, which has battled Israel numerous times. However, a recent fire from Lebanon has been blamed on radical Palestinian factions in the area, and Hezbollah has not been involved in the ongoing offensive. It has largely refrained from engaging Israel since a month-long war in 2006, when it fired thousands of rockets into Israel and was pummeled by Israeli airstrikes in response. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to share with you is that, while we have this pretty significant problem and now a big distraction here in the southern part of our country, across the world, in Israel, there's been a major border crisis happening for years, and now it's kind of evolving into an open form of warfare. Keep your eye on what's happening over there. It's important, and I would not be surprised if what's happening escalates and spreads. I did a show, maybe I'll do a show on Israel's chart on Monday. I did it a while back. And I did it during a time where I was trying to get a sponsor, and they listened to the show, and I think I scared them off. It was probably not the best day to do that show. But we'll look at it on Monday. We'll look at Israel's chart. They've got some issues and challenges, for sure. And the perception, I think, of people around the world, because for a long time, people viewed Israel as victims around this issue and this situation. And they got a lot of support because of, living in an area where it was conceivably dangerous, right? But I think over time that support has significantly eroded. And there's a new view, a new emerging view about Israel that is not as nearly sympathetic as it was. And I think people are going to be getting tired, or are getting tired, of the constant drama, the constant strain, and the drain really on the resources of this country. Billions, hundreds of billions of dollars going to Israel each year in order to fill in the blank. So here, with our border crisis, I think it's going to get worse. We still have the final degrees of Jupiter in Cancer. And also, if you look at where Pluto is, it is opposite the sun, the sun of the U.S., 13 degrees Cancer. Pluto is in opposition to that sun. Pluto in Capricorn, the original U.S. sun at 13 degrees. And this is going to be going on for roughly about a year. For me, this is the start of the new American Revolution, or the next American Revolution. We are engaged now in that degree. And it's not a revolution necessarily against the government. It's a revolution against the hegemonic corporate control and the synthetic mindset that is being forced upon us. And the synthetic mindset is to conform, right? To be assimilated, just like the Borg. And you will be assimilated. And if you're not, you will be taken out or put elsewhere. And that's the story. That is the moral of the story. We're dealing, at least in this country, on a governmental level, with a group of people who've been inspired by Bolshevism. They're Bolsheviks. They're modern Bolsheviks. That's what they are. I'm sorry. I don't want to, I probably lost my gig at Gaiam TV because I had a show about Barack Obama and looked at his various charts, and it probably didn't sit very well. So, but I will come out and just say it as it is. We're dealing with modern Bolsheviks, and their goal is to overthrow the system and to implement another system. Now, the system that they want to implement is a top-down, corporatocratic, crypto-fascist, governmental, industrial-based, but corporate system, right? It is nothing to do with democracy. It is going to be based on kind of a weird hybrid of socialized corporate fascism. This is where it's all going. And if you want to play the game, you want to go along with the story, then you'll probably have a place in their New World Order. But if you don't, if you value things like individual rights and sovereignty and freedom, well, these are all quaint notions. And they're not really going to be tolerated in this new world, this brave new world that is rapidly, and I mean rapidly, and at a frighteningly accelerated pace, coming our way. So the options at this point are also interesting. And what do? Do you stay here? Do you try to talk to people, enlighten people? Do you advocate violence? Do you leave the country? I mean, if you're not down with the dominant program, which is asserting itself, what do you do? Where do you go? That is the big question, isn't it? The $64,000 question. How do we put the brakes on this thing? The only way we put the brakes on it, we push back, or we surrender, or we leave. That's it. Now, there could be some other interesting versions of this on a magical level, and we've seen some of that take place. We've seen some things that have gone south. Like I remember about 2 years ago when everybody got together for the big summit in Norway to talk about global warming, they all had to leave because there was such a huge snowstorm that if they had stayed, they would have gotten snowed in and not been able to leave for another 2 weeks. So there are some interesting things that happen like that. There are things that happen that we're not even aware of at times. But by and large, most of us, or most people, deal with either fight or flight or some variant in between. I don't think ignoring what's happening is going to make it go away. I don't think that the ostrich head in the sand approach is the best strategy. But it's going to swell. It's going to get very intense, especially with this Pluto-Sun opposition. What we're witnessing is the reanimation of the revolutionary mindset that was around at the time of this country's inception, 1776. It's happening right now and will be happening for the next year. Now, what's also interesting is we're going to be seeing Saturn move into Sagittarius. It's going to be squaring next year Neptune. The Saturn-Neptune square will be very powerful because Saturn in Sagittarius is all about law. And it's all about unfortunately, Saturn puts a real heavy-duty blanket on Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is about freedom, right? It's about freedom. It's about sovereignty. It's about adventure. It's about the spirit of the will and philosophy, and it's expansive. And Saturn is heavy. It's gravity. So what we're going to see during Saturn in Sagittarius is this intense gravity, this intense pressure overlaid on the spirit of Sagittarius. And Saturn also represents, culture and corporations and civilization and all the things that we would associate with Saturn and Capricorn. It's also the devil in some ways. It's interesting because Jupiter is in Sagittarius is Jove, right? It's Jove, and Saturn is Satan. So together we have the Jehovah and Satan all in one planetary alignment. And then it's going to be squaring Neptune and Pisces. And Neptune and Pisces generally indicates hope in some ways. That's what on level. It's some form of spiritual hope, but it's also a dissolving aspect. It gets into a structure and then literally melts it, because that's what Pisces does. It's the force of water. It is almost the irresistible force of water. So when you get Neptune squaring Saturn like that, we're looking at the dissolution of something, the dissolution of some kind of form. So it could be the Saturnian form that we have been used to, the type of governance that we've been used to, and maybe there's a new governance that will come out of this. Or it could be, in some ways, the dissolve of the structures around freedom and all these kinds of Sagittarian things that we have become used to in this country. Because I do believe that the ascendant of the United States is Sagittarius. So now we've got Saturn blocking, in some ways, even the ascendant. And so we see the dissolution of some of those values. We might have to say goodbye to our freedom for more quote-unquote security, right? Which has been a theme ever since 9/11. So this is going to be a very interesting time. We're coming into the midterms, and who knows how that's going to go, because most Americans are sick of whoever is in office. Some might have an okay relationship with some of their representatives or senators, but I would be shocked if, unless those crazy voting machines are brought back out, I'd be shocked if a lot of these people return, to be honest with you. I think most Americans just want to flush the entire thing. The trust in government is at an all-time low, by the way. All-time low. 60% of the people do not trust the government. So we've got a lot happening. There's a lot of action taking place, a lot of action. And especially when we get into this Saturn-Neptune square, that's going to be pretty intense. We've got Pluto opposing the sun at 13 degrees, the American revolutionary sun at 13 degrees. So transformation of that identity, whatever that is, or reanimation of that identity. And then we've got the final degrees of Jupiter in Cancer, moving into Jupiter in Leo, which, of course, what does Jupiter in Leo do? It expands the notion of kids. So hopefully, while the whole thing is going down in flames, we can have some fun with Jupiter and Leo. Now, I'm being a little bit cynical. There's still a lot of good things in this world, and still a lot to live for. And you've got your families, you've got your creativity, you've got your own evolving spiritual practice, your ability to stay creative and imaginative, which is what we're here to do. These are the higher ideals that we aspire towards. And if we don't, well, then we just become, and animals get a bad rap. We love animals. They're great beings. But, if we let go of those things, we become less than human. So there's still a lot to live for. There's still a lot to learn. There's still a lot to expand into and express. It's difficult because we have such an intensity and such a dark gravity to our times. But we incarnated here, and this is our time, and this is where we get to, sort it all out. This is where the rubber hits the road, as they say, and where we become, the types of enlightened, spiritual, and authentic and sovereign beings that we all aspire to be. And we all have our own individual piece around that. And that's part of our challenge now, and part of the part of the reward as well. Because if you can do it here now on Earth, you can do it pretty much anywhere, I guarantee you. And if we don't, then the options aren't that great. Let's put it that way. They're just not great. So hopefully this will lend to your awareness. What I'm talking about will lend to your awareness. You become more informed. You become more informed. After you get over your anger, you have perhaps more choices, or you can see things in a different light. In a different light. Now, I talked about this last week. The way to go about it, if you really want to go about it, you go out and you zero out the debt to these countries in Central America. You zero their debt out, and then you begin to remove NAFTA immediately, so that there is true free trade and not this corporate slave trade, which is what NAFTA has devolved into, is really what it is. It's corporate slave trade. So you get all those things in place, and then you begin to pump money into those areas via microloans. These people don't need a lot of money. They don't need $3.4 billion. Some families, all they need is roughly $500. And in a place like El Salvador or Guatemala or Belize or Honduras, $500 would last them a year. And they could start their own little business with the right help, with $500. That's where the money should be spent. In that way, these people can stay and live where they live, enjoy life there with the rest of their family, their extended family, their aunts and uncles, grandma, grandpa, you name it. They don't really want to leave those people, right, for now. Maybe they do for now, but they don't really want to in the long run. So support them in staying there. And let's remove the corrupt governments from these places. We have no problem removing corrupt governments from other places, do we? No, we don't. We just go right in there. And if we don't go right in there, we'll find people that will. And we'll pay them good money, and we'll give them a fancy name like ISIS, and they'll go in and do the dirty work for us. So we want to remove these guys. We have all these vested interests in other places in the world. Why not right back there? Of course, it makes too much sense, doesn't it? Anyway, there are things we can do. There are things that we can do here personally for ourselves, and there are certainly things that can be done on an international level. Will they get it done? No, because it doesn't support the corporations. It doesn't support the cheap labor that comes into this country. It doesn't support the destabilization, because part of this is about chaos. And when you introduce chaos into a system, everybody's running around, and they're like chickens with their heads cut off. They're chasing their own butts. And when all that chaos is happening, it becomes a big distraction. And so something else happens, right? So all we have to do is go back and look at how computer viruses are generated, or how foods are genetically modified. There's a virus that's introduced, and the system becomes so focused on the virus and going after the virus that something else is going on in the back door, and they're slipping in a gene, or they're slipping in some malware or something. So what's happening now at the border is also akin, and I'm sorry, this is not meant to paint these people in a virulent light, but it is a virus, and we're dealing with it, right? We're putting all our attention on this virus over here. Well, there's something else going on somewhere else. I can tell you that right now. I'll tell you that right now. And if we dig around enough, or we wait enough, like over the next few days or few weeks, we'll find that something else has taken place while we were looking the other way. Look at this hand over here. Well, this hand over here is doing something different. So that's another thing that's happening. It's another thing that's taking place. So it's also a political tactic. This is right out of Walensky. It's, polarize. Polarize the masses. And clearly, we have lived since Bush, and Bush was no Walenskyite, but since Bush, we have lived in a polarized universe. Obama has just taken it to another level, but Bush had his own hand in this. He set the stage. He's the one that got the left, up in arms. He's the one that created the intense and angry left. And organizations like Change.org or MoveOn.org all got their start during the Bush administration. And then once Obama came into place and he became the next president, those organizations became very important in terms of the Obama administration. So Bush created the first stage of polarity by igniting the left and giving the left and the progressives enough fuel, enough anger, and enough purpose so that they would mobilize. And now they become mobilized and they've become the power elite in this country. And guess what? Now the right is angry and they're putting their models and their pieces together. And so now we have this massive polarization. You want to talk about a polar vortex? We're living in a polarized vortex. That's what's taking place. And so, when you think about it, it's like, well, what do we do? Can we find the middle way? Can we find the middle path? Is there a way that we can let these people in without being polarized? And, can we come from compassion, a place of compassion, and be like Glenn Beck and bring stuffed animals and cereal to the border? I don't know. We understand that the human condition sucks in other places. We understand that. We're not immune to that. But the human condition is also very difficult in this country. And that's the thing that's not being addressed at all. At all. And it's criminal that it's not. And so now we have this manufactured crisis. And it is a manufactured crisis. I'm sorry to say that. But it's manufactured with the consent of the corporate puppet masters who've created the environment which make it easier to move these people out there. Because if they were happy, you could have as many community organizers walking around with Obama tennis shoes and handouts and say, hey, this is what you're going to get. But if they were happy, they said, well, why would I want to go there? I have everything I need here. I don't need to go there. So the conditions have been created so that the tennis shoes and the pamphlets, well, they look a lot better now. So stay tuned to this. I think, and I was taken to task by this, by the way. I was taken to task by predicting that we would see some form of larger conflagration in this country as a result of it. And I predicted it on my website, and I was taken to task for it. Hey, I may be wrong. But astrology, part of astrology is predictive astrology. It's part of the game. You look at it and say, well, this is likely going to happen. Now, maybe I said it is going to happen, but I think it's likely going to happen. I think we're going to see something significant take place before Jupiter transits into Leo. The 30th degree of Cancer, based on the Sabian symbols, is an Indian woman introduces her white lover to her tribe. Think about that. That's the last degree of Cancer in the Sabian symbols. So there is more to come. There is more of this drama unfolding on our borders to come. All right, so that's it. We've reached the end of today's version of the Friday FARcast. I'll be back on Monday. We're going to do some astrological stuff with the 11th house. I was trying to figure out what we're going to do on Monday. I was going to get into the descendant, the IC and the MC, but I was thinking about doing something else. It crossed my mind earlier today. But we're going to get into I think we might get into Jupiter and Leo. Let's get into Jupiter and Leo because it's almost here. And we'll use Monday, and we'll talk about Jupiter in general. We'll have a whole half an hour or so on Jupiter. It's an interesting planet. I like it personally. I have Jupiter and Sagittarius in my first house, so I feel very at home with Jupiter. So I'll share some of my Jupiter and Sagittarius with the rest of you on Monday. And I want to thank people, by the way, who have sent me emails or I've spoken with you on the phone or Skype, when I've done readings or just in passing. I want to thank you for sharing with me about your thoughts around the show, The 11th House, that I did on Gaiam TV, and the support that I've gotten from that in the since I've stopped doing the show has been really tremendous and really heartwarming. So I want to thank you all for reaching out and telling me how much you liked it and even sending the odd email to Gaiam in support of the show. So thank you for that. We're doing it on radio on Monday to some extent, and I'm in talks right now with somebody here in Austin where we're exploring the possibility of doing it here in Austin. So keep your eyes and ears open. I'll let everybody know how that's going and where it will take place and when, if it evolves in that direction. All right, so have a great weekend and enjoy. Enjoy yourself. I mean, there are certain things that we cannot control at certain points in time in our life. We can work towards awareness and evolvement and enlightenment and taking action when and where we can in ways in which we can empower ourselves and others. And there are other times where we have to sit back and just watch the puppet show while it takes place. So have a good weekend. Enjoy yourself. Spend time with your loved ones, your family, your friends. Appreciate the moments of joy that do come your way. And if some moments that are not filled with joy or challenge cross your path, well, and do your best to appreciate them as well and let them help make you a better person in the meantime. This is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to the Friday FARcast. Thanks again to Richard Grossinger. And I'll be back on Monday with 11th House Radio and the exploration of Jupiter and Leo, free readings, and all the goodness that goes along with it. Take good care. I'll see you on Monday.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.